This video will cover the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement. I'm Nicholas, and you're watching the Law Enforcement Agency Information Channel. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, or NOAA-OLE for short, is a civilian-staffed maritime United States federal law enforcement agency that falls under the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NMFS for short, which falls under the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA for short, which falls under the U.S. Department of Commerce, or DOC for short. Now it's important to note before I get into their responsibilities that as the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement does, while indirectly, fall under the U.S. Department of Commerce, the majority of their responsibilities and individual duties will revolve around protecting America's commerce and economic growth. But anyways, the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement is primarily responsible for enforcing federal laws regarding marine animals and resources, such as, just to list a few, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, Endangered Species Act, Lassie Act, and North Pacific Salmon Act. There are multiple others. I believe the NOAA, and therefore the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, has jurisdiction over approximately 40 federal statutes. But anyways, the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement primarily operates on federally inhabited waters, domestic and international federally inhabited waters. And if you don't know what federally inhabited waters is, that's okay. Federally inhabited waters are essentially waters. Sorry, my computer must shut off there. Waters, so lakes, etc., oceans, etc., that are controlled by the federal government. So this would include national park lakes. Again, national parks are owned by the federal government, and therefore so are their lakes. So those would be considered federally inhabited waters. So would Great Lakes. They're also generally controlled by the federal government. Territorial waters are also a good example. National wildlife refuge sites, so waters of national wildlife refuge sites, etc. Some specific duties or examples of what the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement does would include patrolling and overseeing fishing and other conservation-related activities on U.S. waters to ensure federal laws are being followed. Investigating federal marine crimes such as the unlawful stalking of marine animals, the illegal fishing of fish and shellfish, and the unlawful murder of NOAA employees, and etc. Also additionally, they also are responsible for protecting important Department of Commerce officials, such as and specifically the Assistant Director of the NOAA for Marine Fisheries, as that is the head of the National Marine Fisheries Service. Sorry, my computer was shut off there, for which the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement falls under. The director of the NOAA, and occasionally also the Secretary of Commerce. But typically, the primary agencies for protecting the Secretary of Commerce, or the primary agency for protecting the Secretary of Commerce, is the U.S. Department of Commerce Office of Security. But anyways, that's for a different video. When it comes to their, jurisdiction, and I'll get into their actual jurisdiction later, authority and jurisdiction is very broad when it comes to enforcing federal marine laws, as the majority of crimes taken at sea are federal. They are also very often involved. They have also very often, involve marine mammals. Not always, but very often. This again gives it the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement an even broader jurisdiction. Another cool and unique thing about the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement is that they have both a uniformed and investigative focus. Or function. They both investigate crimes and actually directly enforce federal laws. Someone working within the uniform field of the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement would generally be known as an NOAA enforcement officer, while someone working within my computer must shut off there. While someone working within the investigative field of the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement would generally be known as a NOAA special agent. Again, there are also other positions, but those are the primary law enforcement positions. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for their responsibilities. NOAA enforcement officers and special agents have authority to carry firearms. To carry firearms, issue warrantless arrests, and carry out warrants both on duty and off duty throughout the United States. When it comes to their jurisdiction, they actually share direct concurrent jurisdiction with the U.S. Coast Guard, as both are federal law enforcement agencies with jurisdiction throughout the United States, specifically known as the Exclusive Economic Zone. That basically includes the United States and any waters controlled by the United States, or for which the United States has control over. So again, they have domestic-wide jurisdiction. They specifically have domestic-wide jurisdiction to enforce federal marine laws. This includes investigating federal marine crimes and to protect NOAA and U.S. Department of Commerce officials. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement reports to the Assistant Director of the NOAA for Marine Fisheries, who reports to the Director of the NOAA, who reports to the Secretary of Commerce, who reports to the President of the United States. Now, I'm going to break it down in case you don't know or you don't understand why that actually is, that their rank structure is like that. Basically, because they fall under the National Marine Fisheries Service, they report directly to the head of the National Marine Fisheries Service, which is the Assistant Director of the NOAA for Marine Fisheries. And furthermore, since the National Marine Fisheries Service falls under the NOAA, it reports to its head reports to the director of the NOAA, who leads the NOAA, who anyways reports to the since the NOAA falls under the Department of Commerce, therefore it reports to the head of the Department of Commerce, which is the Secretary of Commerce. And therefore, because the Department of Commerce is a part of the executive branches of the U.S. federal government, it therefore reports to the head of the executive branch of the U.S. federal government, who is the President of the United States. The rank structure of the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement from high to low is in the following order: Director, Deputy Director, Assistant Director, um, Special Agent in Charge, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Special Agent, Supervisory Enforcement Officer, and lastly, Enforcement Officer. When it comes to their motto, the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement doesn't have a exact motto per se, but does have a mission statement, which is, quote, to protect the nation's marine wildlife and habitat by enforcing domestic laws and international treaties for conservation and management of global resources for the future. Now, again, when they say domestic laws, they are referring to federal laws. Really, when they say international treaties, those are federal laws already. They just added that on to, emphasize it. But anyways, yeah, so international treaties are federal laws very often. Typically, as soon as a international treaty for which applies to the U.S. is made, Congress will typically establish or put that treaty into federal law. So, for example, the North Pacific Salmon Treaty Act, that is a federal law. It is not only a international treaty, but is also a federal law. Again, because international treaties, they wouldn't really apply to the United States, also because the United States is one of the few countries that actually doesn't follow international laws. But anyways, so in other words, Congress has to put that treaty into federal law in order for it to apply to the United States at all, because again, it wouldn't really be enforced otherwise. So there's no way of when they say they enforce international treaties, what they really mean is they're enforcing international treaties defined by federal law. So yeah. Training for the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement varies based upon the specific position for which you are applying to. For example, those applying to become a NOAA enforcement officer typically are required to undergo one training course known as the Basic Officers Training Class, which lasts approximately 12 weeks and is located at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. However, if you are planning to become an NOAA special agent, then you would have to go through 4 training courses. The first training course is known as the Criminal Investigators Training Program, or CITP for short, and is located at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and lasts approximately 12 weeks. The second training course is known as the Marine Law Enforcement Training Program, which is also located at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and takes approximately 4 weeks. And then the third training course is known as it's known as the Case Organization and Presentation Training Program, and lasts approximately 2 weeks, and is located at my computer must shut off there, and is located at and is also located at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. And then that was the third. So the fourth and last one is known as the is known as the field training and evaluation training program, which is located at several NOAA facilities and lasts approximately 12 weeks. So to sum it up, the total training duration of time for which NOAA special agents trained for is, well, let me see, sorry, added up 24, and then, sorry, I'm not that good at math, 30. So it would be a total of 30 weeks, which is average for a federal law enforcement agency. So, yeah, but the reason why they go through a slightly or heavily longer amount of training than NOAA enforcement officers is simply because of their investigative roles. Investigative roles typically require more training, and this is not only for the NOAA, but it's also universally. So yeah. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement works with multiple law enforcement agencies from federal, state to local. For example, they are known to share, cooperative agreements with state environmentally focused law enforcement agencies, such as the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Massachusetts Environmental Police, and multiple others, particularly over patrolling certain territorial waters for which they share concurrent jurisdiction over. However, with that being said, they are known to have the most. They are known to work with, or they are known to work the most frequently with the U.S. Coast Guard, particularly its reserve officers and special agents. For example, U.S. Coast Guard reserve officers and NOAA enforcement officers will very often work with each other. For example, let's say a NOAA enforcement officer encounters a boat crash at sea. He or she would most likely contact a nearby U.S. Coast Guard reserve officer, as they are more equipped to handle such situations. And it goes the same way. Special agents, U.S. Coast Guard special agents, and NOAA special agents very often work with each other. Same idea. If a NOAA special agent is investigating a federal environmental / marine crime that takes place at sea, he or she will most likely work with. Sorry, my computer must shut off there. Will most likely work with the U.S. Coast Guard special agents, as that is also their jurisdiction too. So they have a lot of joint. They do a lot of joint collaboration exercises. They are also known to work with the EPA, Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, particularly over investigating federal environmental crimes. I mean, I don't know. They are also known to work with the FBI. They'll alert them over potential or active crimes that could threaten national security or the economy. As that is really most government agencies, if they witness or if they believe there is a potential national security related threat, they are typically required to alert the FBI, especially if they are federal. Anyways, there are some certain cases where multiple agencies, including the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement, have worked with each other. Particularly, actually, I don't know specific cases where they've worked with each other throughout the past, but I mean, I could give a hypothetical example. I mean, all right. Let's say, let's say they're Okay, let's say there is, hypothetically, and this is probably the worst example out there. Let's say an Al Qaeda terrorist murders a fisherman at sea, and that same Al Qaeda terrorist is also wanted for murder of a federal judge. Sorry, my computer, I'm gonna shut off there. TSA officer, and a Marine. And additionally, he is also wanted for illegally carrying firearms and drugs, federally prohibited firearms and drugs. And added on top of that, let's say he also is wanted for, this is the worst example. Let's say he's also wanted for attempting or threatening to blow up the IRS's headquarters. Again, horrible example. This is not going to happen in real life. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. What would happen in this case is every agency that investigates such crimes would get involved. So this would include, let's see. Well, firstly, they killed that terrorist killed a fisherman, so it would fall under the NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement's jurisdiction. So that is one of the agencies we'll add to the list. Another agency, since they did kill a federal judge, would include the U.S. Marshal Service, as the U.S. Marshal Service explicitly has jurisdiction over judiciary related matters, crimes regarding judicial officials. And also, since he killed a TSA officer, another agency involved will be the Federal Air Marshal Service. They do investigate the murders of TSA officers. And since he murdered a Marine, we can also say that the NCIS, or U.S. Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and the U.S. Marine Corps Criminal Investigations Division, sorry, my computer must shut off there, will also get involved, because both two agencies investigate the murder of U.S. Marines. And additionally, also, since that terrorist is carrying federally prohibited firearms, the ATF, or Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, will also get involved. And since he is also carrying federally prohibited drugs, you get what I'm about to say. The DEA will also get involved, and I hope you know what that stands for. But anyways, because he threatened to blow up the IRS's headquarters, the IRS-AID will also get involved. Again, this is just an approximate guess for what would happen in such a case. There's no real answer, because not such a case has ever happened in the past. Again, that was probably the worst example out there. It is not going to happen. It is not likely it's going to happen. It's just a hypothetical example. So yeah, in such, usually there are only a few agencies that get involved, as only a few agencies have jurisdiction, especially over marine waters. So most agencies don't really enforce laws on U.S. waters. Of course, federal law enforcement agencies being an exception, they most do generally not enforce laws on marine waters. That is, of course, unless a crime within their jurisdiction has been committed on marine waters. So, for example, the Federal Air Marshal Service, they don't typically operate on water, but because a TSA officer was murdered by the same guy who killed a fisherman on water, they are allowed to operate on water. They have jurisdiction over that crime. Sorry, my computer was shut off there. That's pretty much it. I hope that example was at least helpful. No, it was a bad example, but anyways, yeah. For the question, can the NOAA Office of Law Enforcement enforce federal immigration laws? The simple answer is no. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement cannot directly enforce federal immigration laws, as it simply is not within their sphere of authority, nor jurisdiction, nor responsibilities. The NOAA Office of Law Enforcement falls under the U.S. Department of Commerce, which, as its name suggests, focuses on commerce and economic growth. The only federal executive department with authority to enforce federal immigration laws is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. More specifically, not every agency within the Department of Homeland Security. I should clarify that the Department of Homeland Security is the only federal executive department with authority to enforce federal immigration laws. Not all agencies within the U.S. Department of Homeland Security have authority to enforce federal immigration laws. The primary agencies within the Department of Homeland Security for enforcing federal immigration laws are the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Coast Guard. They are the primary agencies. But aside from those three, pretty much no other federal law enforcement agency, or for that matter, law enforcement agency in general, has direct authority to enforce federal immigration laws. However, with that being said, if a NOAA enforcement officer directly witnesses you commit a federal immigration crime, he or she can take action. This would include making an arrest. Generally, they would transfer you in such a situation, they're typically required to transfer you to immigration authorities. Technically, sorry, my computer must shut off there. Technically, if they are, let's say, patrolling in federally inhabited waters and they witness you commit a immigration crime, they are allowed to arrest you and go on with it, but generally they are supposed to transfer you to immigration authorities. What would most likely happen if in such a case, like if an NOAA enforcement officer witnesses a federal immigration crime, what would most likely happen is that officer might most likely contact the U.S. Coast Guard, as they are literally a agency within the Department of Homeland Security. They are also designed, the U.S. Coast Guard is designed to deal with such situations. They are not only a law enforcement agency within the Department of Homeland Security, but also a maritime branch of the military. So they are actually designed to deal with such situations. So in such a case, they would most likely contact the U.S. Coast Guard, and in the alternative that they are, which is unlikely, that they are miles away, they would most likely contact the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But typically, the U.S. Coast Guard is the first responders to federal immigration crimes. They're typically the nearest by officers to NOAA officers. They patrol the same waters as the NOAA, in other words. But yeah, so that's pretty much it.